The mahogany conference table stretched endlessly before Marcus Chen, its polished surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights of the boardroom. Around him, 15 executives in identical navy suits debated quarterly projections and market expansions, their voices blending into a meaningless drone. Marcus stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Chicago penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a circuit board of ambition and concrete. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 42, Marcus had achieved everything he'd dreamed of as a hungry kid, with nothing but determination and a borrowed laptop. Chen Technologies had revolutionized cloud computing, making him one of the youngest billionaires in America. His face-graced magazine covers, his quotes moved stock markets, and his donations funded hospitals and universities across 3 continents. Yet as he sat in this glass tower he'd built, surrounded by people who hung on his every word, Marcus felt completely hollow. The meeting droned on, discussing the acquisition of a smaller tech firm in Seattle. Marcus nodded at appropriate intervals, signed documents placed before him, and made decisions that would affect thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. But his mind wandered to the envelope sitting unopened on his private desk, the one that had arrived 3 days ago with a return address that made his chest tighten. Sunshine Children's Home. The same faded yellow building where he'd spent the first 18 years of his life before scholarships and sheer willpower had catapulted him into a world of privilege he'd never imagined possible. The same place he'd deliberately avoided for over 2 decades, despite his assistant's gentle suggestions about charitable visits and the countless invitations that arrived each year. The letter had been brief, written in the careful handwriting of someone unaccustomed to addressing billionaires. Mrs. Patricia Kellerman, the new director, had simply requested his presence for their annual fundraising gala. She mentioned that several children had specifically asked about him, having researched his background for a school project about successful alumni. The thought of children knowing his story, of them looking up to someone who'd emerged from their same circumstances, should have filled him with pride. Instead, it terrified him. Marcus had built walls around his past, constructing a narrative of self-made success that conveniently omitted the years of uncertainty, the nights spent wondering if anyone would ever choose him, the deep-seated fear that he was fundamentally unwanted. Success had been his armor, wealth his validation, but the letter had cracked something inside him that money couldn't fix. The meeting finally ended, executives filing out with their tablets and leather portfolios, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of his thoughts. He walked to his private office, a sanctuary of minimalist design and breathtaking views, and picked up the letter again. The paper felt different from the expensive stationery he was accustomed to, slightly rough and practical, like everything else from his childhood. His phone buzzed with a text from his driver confirming the evening's schedule. Marcus had planned to attend a charity auction for pediatric cancer research, the kind of high-profile event where his presence would be photographed and his donations would generate positive press. It was important work, meaningful in its own way, but suddenly it felt performative, distant from any real human connection. Without fully understanding why, Marcus found himself cancelling his evening plans and instructing his driver to take him to Sunshine Children's Home. The decision felt impulsive, reckless even, but something deep inside him demanded this reckoning with his past. The drive from downtown Chicago to the South Side took 45 minutes through increasingly familiar neighborhoods. Marcus watched through tinted windows as gleaming skyscrapers gave way to modest homes, corner stores, and tree-lined streets where children played on sidewalks. The transformation was gradual but profound. like traveling backward through time to a version of himself he'd almost forgotten. Sunshine Children's Home occupied a full city block, its main building a sturdy brick structure that had weathered decades of Chicago winters. The playground equipment looked newer than Marcus remembered, bright primary colors replacing the rusted swings and broken seesaws of his youth. A vegetable garden had been added near the eastern fence, neat rows of fall vegetables tended with obvious care. Marcus sat in his Tesla for several minutes, gathering courage he hadn't needed since his first major investor presentation. Through the main windows, he could see children moving about, their voices carrying across the evening air. A group of older kids played basketball on a court that had been resurfaced since his time there, their laughter echoing off the surrounding buildings. The front door was the same heavy oak that had welcomed and intimidated him countless times as a child. Marcus pressed the buzzer, noting the small security camera that represented one of many upgrades the facility had received over the years. His donations, he realized with a start, channeled through his foundation, but never personally acknowledged. A young woman answered the door, her face brightening with recognition despite never having met him in person. The power of digital media, Marcus thought wryly, his image probably more familiar than his actual presence deserved to be. "Welcome, Mr. Chen," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, the assistant director. Mrs. Kellerman is finishing up with dinner service, but she'll be with you shortly. We're so honored that you could visit." The foyer had been completely renovated, warm colors and modern furniture replacing the institutional green walls and metal folding chairs Marcus remembered. Artwork clearly created by the children covered every available surface, bright paintings and drawings that spoke of hope and creativity, flourishing despite circumstances. Sarah led him through corridors that felt both familiar and foreign, past glass rooms that had been updated with modern technology and common areas that buzzed with evening activity. The smell was different too, less institutional and more homely, carrying hints of fresh bread and cleaning supplies mixed with the particular energy that came from housing 60 children under one roof. They passed the dining hall where Marcus had eaten thousands of meals, now renovated with round tables instead of long institutional benches, warm lighting instead of harsh fluorescents. Children of various ages sat together, some helping younger ones with their food, others engaged in animated conversations about their day. Marcus found himself slowing as they walked, memories flooding back with unexpected intensity. The corner, where he'd hidden to read library books, trying to escape into other worlds. The window seat where he'd watched potential adoptive families come and go, hope and disappointment cycling endlessly through his young heart. The staircase he'd climbed every night to a dormitory room shared with 3 other boys, each pretending. Sleep came easily. "Mr. Chen," a gentle voice called from behind them. Marcus turned to see a woman in her 60s approaching, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, her face kind, but showing the particular type of tiredness that came from dedicating one's life to caring for others. Mrs. Patricia Kellerman moved with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to managing chaos while maintaining calm. "Thank you for coming," she continued, reaching out to shake his hand. "I know this must bring back many memories, not all of them easy ones. We're deeply grateful for your time and for everything your foundation has done for our facility." Marcus nodded, finding his voice after a moment of unexpected emotion. "The changes are remarkable. This place looks nothing like what I remember." Mrs. Kellerman smiled, pride evident in her expression. "We've been fortunate to receive support from alumni, like yourself, people who understand what these children need because they've walked the same path. But the heart of this place, the real magic that hasn't changed, these kids are just as resilient, just as full of potential as you were at their age." They continued the tour, Marcus taking in renovated classrooms equipped with computers and smart boards A library that had tripled in size since his youth, and recreational facilities that would rival those at expensive private schools. Yet what struck him most wasn't the physical improvements, but the atmosphere. There was a warmth here, a sense of family and belonging that he didn't remember from his own experience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the art room, a group of younger children worked on paintings under the supervision of a volunteer instructor. Marcus paused in the doorway, watching their intense concentration as they mixed colors and applied brushstrokes with the seriousness of master artists. One little girl, perhaps 7 or 8, looked up and caught his eye through the glass. She had dark hair pulled into neat braids and eyes that seemed far too knowing for her age. The girl smiled and waved, her paintbrush leaving a small streak of blue on her cheek. Marcus found himself waving back, surprised by the genuine warmth in her expression. Most children seemed slightly intimidated by him, perhaps picking up on the authority that came with his position, but this little girl appeared completely unimpressed by whatever importance he might possess. "That's Sophia," Mrs. Kellerman said, noticing his attention. "She's been with us for about a year now. Remarkable child, very bright, very observant. She has a way of seeing straight through to what matters most." They moved on, but Marcus found himself glancing back toward the art room, the image of Sophia's paint-streaked smile lingering in his mind. There had been something familiar about her expression, a quality of resilience mixed with hope that he recognized from his own reflection in bathroom mirrors decades ago. The tour concluded in Mrs. Kellerman's office, a cozy space filled with photographs of former residents who had gone on to successful lives. Marcus spotted his own image among them, a formal headshot from a business magazine, and felt a complex mix of pride and disconnection. The boy who had left this place bore little resemblance to the man who had returned. "I wanted to show you something special," Mrs. Kellerman said, moving to a filing cabinet and withdrawing a folder. "We've been working on a project with the children, having them research and write about alumni who've made significant impacts in their fields. The enthusiasm they've shown for learning about people like you has been incredible." She handed him several sheets of paper, each containing a child's report about his life and achievements. The writing was earnest and filled with obvious research, covering his early innovations in cloud computing, his philanthropic efforts, and his rise from orphan child to technology leader. But what moved Marcus most were the personal reflections. Each child had added, connecting his story to their own hopes and dreams. Marcus Chen shows us that where you start doesn't determine where you finish, wrote a 12-year-old named David. He had the same beginning as us, but never gave up on his dreams. Another child, a 10-year-old girl named Lisa, had written, "Mr. Chen proves that having a big heart is just as important as having a big brain. He uses his success to help other people like us." The words hit Marcus harder than any business review or magazine profile ever had. These children saw something in his story that he'd almost forgotten, the human journey beneath the corporate success. They understood struggle in ways that his current peers never could, and their hope felt both inspiring and overwhelming. "There's one more report I'd like you to see," Mrs. Kellerman said softly, reaching into the folder again. "This one is particularly special." She handed him a final paper, this one written in the careful cursive of someone still mastering penmanship. The name at the top read, Sophia Martinez, and Marcus realized this was the same little girl he'd seen in the art room. Her report was shorter than the others, but somehow more profound. "Mr. Chen and I have something important in common," Sophia had written. "We both know what it feels like to wonder if anyone will choose us. But he learned that sometimes the most important choice is the one we make for ourselves. He chose to be kind even when the world wasn't always kind to him. He chose to remember where he came from, even when he could afford to forget. That's the kind of person I want to be too. Marcus read the words twice, his throat tightening with unexpected emotion. This child, barely 8 years old, had distilled his entire life's journey into a few simple sentences that cut directly to the heart of everything he'd been struggling with. She had seen through the surface success to the essential human truth beneath. Sophia requested specifically that you receive her report, Mrs. Kellerman explained. She's been asking about you for weeks, ever since we announced your visit. She has something she'd like to show you if you're willing. Marcus nodded, unable to trust his voice. Mrs. Kellerman led him back through the corridors, past children finishing homework in study halls and others engaged in quiet evening activities. The atmosphere was peaceful but lively, the kind of purposeful, calm that spoke of excellent management and genuine care. They found Sophia in the library, a newly expanded space with comfortable reading nooks and thousands of books organized by both age and interest level. She sat in a corner chair that seemed too large for her small frame, reading what appeared to be a chapter book well above her apparent grade level. When she saw Marcus approaching, her face lit up with the same warm smile he'd noticed earlier. "Hi, Mr. Chen," she said simply, closing her book and standing with the particular mixture of confidence and politeness that some children possessed naturally. "Thank you for coming to visit us. I was hoping I could show you something important." Mrs. Kellerman excused herself with a gentle smile, giving Sophia and Marcus privacy for their conversation. Marcus took a seat in the chair across from Sophia, noting how she seemed completely comfortable despite the obvious disparity in their ages and circumstances. "I read about your life," Sophia began, her voice serious but not intimidated. "You lived here when you were young, just like me. You didn't have a regular family either." Marcus nodded, surprised by her directness. "That's right. I was here in time I was very small, until I graduated from high school." Sophia considered this information carefully, her dark eyes studying his face with an intensity that reminded Marcus of the way she'd focused on her painting earlier. She reached into a small backpack beside her chair and withdrew a manila envelope, handling it with obvious care. "Mrs. Kellerman said you help lots of kids now, with your money and your foundation," Sophia continued. "But I think maybe you forgot something important about being a kid here yourself." The observation was delivered without judgment, simply a statement of fact from someone who had clearly given the matter considerable thought. Marcus found himself leaning forward, genuinely curious about this child's perspective. "What do you think I forgot?" he asked. Sophia opened the envelope carefully, revealing several sheets of paper that had been folded and refolded many times. The paper was yellowed with age, the creases deep and permanent from years of handling. "This belonged to my mom," Sophia said softly. "She lived here too, a long time ago, before I was born. She kept this letter until she died, and the social worker gave it to me when I came here." Marcus felt his heart rate increase as Sophia unfolded the pages. The handwriting was feminine and careful, the ink slightly faded, but still clearly legible. At the top of the first page, in the elegant script of someone who had taken time and care with their words, was a name that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Elena Martinez. Sophia continued speaking, but Marcus barely heard her words over the rushing sound in his ears. Elena Martinez. He hadn't thought about Elena in years, had deliberately pushed memories of her into the deepest corners of his mind, where success and time could bury them safely. Elena had been 2 years older than Marcus, a quiet girl with an extraordinary talent for writing, who had arrived at Sunshine when he was 14. She'd been placed in the home after her grandmother, her only living relative, had passed away, leaving her with nowhere else to go. Unlike many of the children who cycled through the system, Elena had possessed a stability and grace that made her stand out. Marcus remembered her sitting in this same library, always reading, always writing, in a notebook she carried everywhere. They had become friends, slowly, bonding over their shared love of books and their mutual understanding of what it meant to be alone in the world. Elena had been one of the few people who truly understood his driving ambition to escape their circumstances. Through education and hard work, their friendship had deepened during Elena's final year at Sunshine, growing into something that felt like love to two teenagers who had experienced precious little of it in their young lives. They had made plans, dreams of staying connected after Elena aged out of the system, of building something together once Marcus finished high school and they could both start their adult lives. But Elena had left Sunshine on her 18th birthday, as all residents did, and despite their promises to stay in touch, the realities of survival had pulled them in different directions. Marcus had thrown himself into his studies with desperate intensity, earning scholarships that would take him far from Chicago and everything it represented. Elena had simply vanished from his life, another casualty of a system that scattered young people like seeds in the wind. Now, 24 years later, Marcus sat across from a little girl who carried Elena's name and her mother's eyes, holding a letter that had somehow survived decades of uncertainty and loss. "What does the letter say?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia looked at him with those knowing eyes, and Marcus had the strangest feeling that she was seeing far more than a successful businessman visiting his childhood home. She was seeing the scared 14-year-old who had fallen in love with her mother, the young man who had left with promises he'd been unable to keep. "It's to the person she loved at Sunshine," Sophia said simply. "The boy who was going to change the world, but who she was afraid might forget what really mattered along the way." Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him as Sophia began to unfold the letter completely. The careful creases revealed multiple pages covered in Elena's distinctive handwriting, each line filled with words that had waited over 2 decades to reach their intended recipient. "She told me to find you," Sophia continued, her voice soft but steady. "She said that if anything ever happened to her, I should make sure you got this letter. She said you'd understand what it meant, and that maybe it would help you remember something important you might have forgotten." The letter trembled slightly in Sophia's small hands as she held it out to Marcus. He stared at it for a long moment, understanding that accepting those pages would change everything. The careful walls he'd built around his past, the narrative of self-made success that had carried him through decades of achievement, would crumble the moment he read Elena's words. But looking into Sophia's eyes, seeing Elena's smile reflected in her daughter's face, Marcus realized that some walls were meant to be torn down. Some truths were worth facing, regardless of how much they might hurt or how much they might change the story he'd been telling himself about his life. He reached out and took the letter, his fingers brushing against Sophia's as she transferred the precious pages into his care. The paper felt warm from her touch, and Marcus had the strange sense that he was receiving not just a message from his past, but a key to understanding his future. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't felt in years. "Thank you for keeping this safe, for finding me, for making sure I could read her words." Sophia nodded solemnly, settling back into her chair with the patience of someone much older than her 8 years. She watched as Marcus unfolded the first page completely, his eyes moving to the top where Elena had written a date that made his chest tighten with recognition. May 15th, the year Elena had left Sunshine. The day before her 18th birthday, the last day they had been together in the place that had been home to them both. "My dearest Marcus," the letter began, and suddenly Elena's voice was as clear in his mind as if she were sitting beside them in the library, reading the words aloud in the soft tone he remembered so well. "If you're reading this, It means I found a way to get these words to you, probably long after I first wrote them. I hope you're well, I hope you're happy, and I hope you've achieved all those big dreams we used to talk about under the oak tree, in the courtyard. Marcus looked up sharply, meeting Sophia's gaze. The oak tree had been their special place, a spot where they could sit and plan for futures that seemed both impossible and inevitable. He'd forgotten about those conversations, had buried them so deeply that remembering them now felt like recovering lost treasure. "I'm writing this on my last night at Sunshine," Elena's letter continued, "because I need you to know some things. I never found the courage to tell you in person. Tomorrow I'll leave this place and start my adult life, and I know that our paths will probably take us in very different directions. You have such big dreams, such important goals, and I would never want to be the reason you compromise any of them. But I need you to know that you changed my life in ways you probably never realized. You showed me what it meant to have someone believe in me, someone who saw possibilities I couldn't see myself. When I was scared about aging out, about facing the world alone, you reminded me that I was stronger than I knew. When I doubted my writing, you encouraged me to keep telling stories because you said the world needed to hear what I had to say." Marcus felt tears threatening as he read Elena's words, remembering their late-night conversations about books and dreams and the futures they hoped to build. Elena had been the first person to take his ambitions seriously, to believe that a boy from Sunshine could actually achieve something significant in the world. Most importantly, the letter continued, "You taught me that loving someone doesn't mean holding them back. Real love means wanting the best for someone, even if that means letting them go. So I'm letting you go, Marcus, not because I don't care about you, but because I care about you too much to ask you to choose between your dreams and staying connected to this place. I know you'll do amazing things with your life. I know you'll build something important and help people and change the world the way you always said you would. But I hope that someday, when you've accomplished everything you set out to do, you'll remember that the most important things in life aren't the ones you can build or buy or achieve. The most important things are the connections we make with other people, the love we give and receive, the way we choose to treat those who can't do anything for us in return." Marcus looked up again, his vision blurred with tears he couldn't hold back. Sophia was watching him with gentle concern, her young face showing a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "There's more," she said softly. "The important part comes next." Marcus returned his attention to the letter, his hands shaking slightly as he turned to the second page. "I need to tell you something else, Marcus. Something I discovered just a few days ago. I'm pregnant, I'm going to have a baby, and that baby is yours." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making the library spin around him. He read the sentence again, then a third time, trying to process information that rewrote everything he thought he understood about his life. "I know this news might change everything for you," Elena had written, "and I want you to know that I don't expect anything. I made the choice not to tell you in person because I didn't want you to feel trapped or obligated. You have such important things to accomplish, such big dreams to pursue, and I couldn't bear the thought of being the reason you gave them up." Marcus gripped the letter tighter, his mind racing through calculations and implications. If Elena had been pregnant when she left Sunshine, if she'd had his child, then Sophia sitting across from him wasn't just Elena's daughter. She was his daughter too. "I'm going to raise this baby with all the love I have," Elena's letter continued. "I'm going to tell her about you, about how brilliant and kind and determined you are. I'm going to make sure she knows that her father is someone special, someone who was meant to do important things in the world. And maybe someday, when she's older and you've had time to build the life you're meant to live, maybe then there will be a chance for you to know her too. But whether that day comes or not, I want you to know that you've already given me the greatest gift imaginable. This baby is a piece of you that I get to keep forever, a reminder of the most important relationship of my young life. She'll be raised knowing that she comes from strength, from intelligence, from a father who refused to let circumstances define his limits. The letter continued for several more paragraphs, Elena sharing her hopes for their child's future and her continued belief in Marcus's potential for greatness. But Marcus found himself reading the same sentences over and over, trying to absorb the magnitude of what he'd just learned. Sophia was his daughter, this remarkable little girl with Elena's eyes and Sophia's gentle wisdom was his child, the child he'd never known existed. For 8 years, she'd been growing up in the same orphanage where he'd once lived, while he'd been building a fortune that could have changed her entire life. The irony was crushing. He'd spent decades donating millions to organizations that helped children, supporting causes related to education and family services, trying in some abstract way to give back to the community that had shaped him. Meanwhile, his own daughter had been living in the very institution he'd fled, facing the same uncertainties and challenges he'd once navigated alone. "Mr. Chen," Sophia's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Are you okay?" Marcus looked up at her, this child who was apparently half of himself and half of the first person he'd ever truly loved. She was watching him with concern but no surprise, and he realized with a start that she had known exactly what the letter contained before. She'd given it to him. "You knew," he said softly. "You knew what the letter said before you showed it to me." Sophia nodded solemnly. "Mom told me before she died. She said my father was a good man who lived at Sunshine when he was young, just like us. She said he was going to be very successful and help lots of people, but that he might forget sometimes what really mattered. She made me promise that if I ever met you, I'd give you her letter and remind you about love." The simplicity of her explanation made Marcus's heart ache. Elena had spent years preparing their daughter for this moment, ensuring that Sophia would understand her heritage and her father's identity, even if they never had the chance to meet. She'd raised Sophia with stories about him, maintaining a connection that he'd never even known existed. "How long have you known I was coming to visit?" Marcus asked. Sophia considered the question carefully. "Mrs. Kellerman told us about the special visitor a few weeks ago," she said. "When she said your name, I knew it was you. Mom always said you'd come back to Sunshine someday, when you were ready to remember where you came from." The revelation that Sophia had been anticipating his visit, had been prepared for this moment, made Marcus feel even more overwhelmed. While he'd been reluctantly responding to an invitation he'd almost ignored, she'd been waiting for a reunion she'd been expecting her entire young life. "What happened to your mother?" Marcus asked gently, dreading the answer but needing to know. Sophia's expression grew sad but remained composed. "She got sick when I was 6, she said simply. "Cancer. She fought really hard for 2 years, but the doctors couldn't make her better. Before she died, she made sure all her important papers went to Mrs. Kellerman, including the letter for you." Marcus felt a wave of grief wash over him, mourning not just Eleanor's death, but all the lost years between them. If he'd known about Sophia's existence, if Elena had found a way to reach him sooner, he could have helped with medical bills, could have ensured Elena received the best possible care. His wealth, which had felt meaningless just hours ago, now seemed like a cruel irony. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry about your mother, and I'm sorry I wasn't there when you both needed me." Sophia reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his with surprising strength. "It's okay," she said simply. "Mom always said everything happens when it's supposed to happen. She said you'd find me when I was old enough to understand who you are, and when you were ready to remember what family really means." The wisdom in her words, delivered with such matter-of-fact acceptance, made Marcus realize that Eleanor had done an extraordinary job preparing their daughter for this moment. Sophia wasn't angry about his absence or resentful about the years they'd lost. She was simply glad that the waiting was finally over. They sat together in the library as evening settled over Sunshine Children's Home, Marcus reading the rest of Elena's letter while Sophia patiently waited beside him. The letter concluded with Elena's hopes for their daughter's future and her continued faith in Marcus's essential goodness, despite the years and success that might have changed him. In the final paragraph, Elena had written words that would stay with Marcus forever. "I know that life might take us in different directions, and I know that success might change you in ways neither of us can predict. But I believe that the boy I fell in love with at Sunshine will always be part of who you are. He was kind and generous and determined to make the world better for people like us. If you ever lose sight of that boy, if you ever feel disconnected from what really matters, look for him in our daughter's eyes. She carries the best parts of both of us." As Marcus finished reading, he looked up to find Sophia watching him with those very eyes Elena had written about. In her gaze, he could see traces of his own determination mixed with Elena's compassion, his drive tempered by her wisdom. She was indeed the best parts of both of them, raised with love and purpose despite circumstances that could have broken her spirit. "What happens now?" Sophia asked quietly, her voice carrying both hope and acceptance of whatever answer he might give. Marcus folded the letter carefully, understanding that these pages would become one of his most treasured possessions. He looked at his daughter, this remarkable child who had patiently waited 8 years to meet him, and felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of what success actually meant. "Now," he said softly, "we figure out how to be a family." The silence stretched between them as Marcus processed the weight of Sophia's question. Outside the library windows, the last traces of daylight faded into the purple hues of early evening, and the sounds of children settling into their nighttime. Routines drifted through the corridors. Marcus could hear Mrs. Kellerman's voice in the distance, gentle but firm as she guided younger residents through their bedtime preparations. Marcus looked at Sophia, this child who had materialized from his past like a living bridge between the boy he'd once been and the man he'd become. She sat with remarkable composure for someone her age, her dark eyes reflecting Elena's patience and what Marcus was beginning to recognize as his own stubborn determination. The letter rested between them on the small table, its yellowed pages, holding secrets that had reshaped his entire understanding of his life. "I don't know exactly what happens now," Marcus admitted, his honesty feeling both terrifying and liberating. "This is all very new for me, Sophia. I've spent most of my adult life focused on building companies and making money, but I've never been responsible for another person the way a father should be." Sophia tilted her head thoughtfully, a gesture that reminded Marcus painfully of Eleanor. "Mom used to say that being a parent isn't about knowing everything," she said quietly. "She said it was about showing up and trying your best and loving someone even when things are hard." The simple wisdom of her words made Marcus's chest tighten. Elena had clearly spent considerable time preparing Sophia for life's complexities, instilling in her a maturity that seemed far beyond her 8 years. Yet beneath that wisdom, Marcus could see the vulnerability of a child who had lost her mother and was now meeting her father for the first time. Mrs. Kellerman appeared in the library doorway, her expression gentle but concerned. "I hate to interrupt," she said softly, "but it's getting close to Sophia's bedtime. We try to maintain consistent routines for all our children." "Of course," Marcus said, standing quickly. He felt suddenly awkward, uncertain about the protocols of this new relationship. Should he hug Sophia goodnight, shake her hand? The billionaire who commanded boardrooms with confidence found himself paralyzed by the simple question of how to say goodbye to his own daughter. Sophia solved the dilemma by standing and moving toward him without hesitation. She wrapped her small arms around his waist in a hug that felt both natural and profound, her head barely reaching his chest. Marcus embraced her carefully, as if she were made of something precious and fragile. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked, her voice slightly muffled against his shirt. "Yes," Marcus said without hesitation. "If that's what you'd like, I'll come back tomorrow." Sophia pulled back and looked up at him with a smile that transformed her entire face. "I'd like that very much," she said. "Maybe you could see my room, and I could show you my drawings. Mom always said I inherited artistic talent from someone special." Marcus felt his heart skip at the casual way she referenced their genetic connection, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Of course," he managed to say. "I'd love to see your artwork." As Mrs. Kellerman led Sophia away for her evening routine, the little girl turned back once to wave at Marcus. He stood in the library long after they'd disappeared, Elena's letter still, clutched in his hands, trying to process the magnitude of how completely his life had just changed. The drive back to his penthouse passed in a blur of city lights and racing thoughts. Marcus sat in the back of his Tesla, staring unseeing at the Chicago skyline, while his mind struggled to reconcile the successful businessman he'd become with the father he'd apparently been for 8 years without knowing it. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent decades building an empire, while his own daughter grew up in the same institution he'd escaped. His penthouse felt different when he returned, its modern minimalism now seeming cold and unwelcoming, rather than sophisticated. The floor-to-ceiling windows that usually made him feel powerful now made him feel isolated, suspended above a city full of people while remaining fundamentally disconnected from meaningful human relationships. Marcus poured himself a glass of wine he barely tasted and sat in his home office, surrounded by the awards and achievements that had once defined his sense of self-worth. Elena's letter lay open on his desk, her words seeming to glow under the soft light of his reading lamp. He read it again, slower this time, absorbing details he'd missed in his initial shock. Elena had written about their daughter with such love and hope, describing a child who was curious about the world, gifted in art, and possessed of a gentle spirit that could find joy even in difficult circumstances. She'd painted a picture of Sophia as someone who asked thoughtful questions, who noticed when others were sad, who had an uncanny ability to see through pretense to the truth beneath. The description matched exactly the little girl Marcus had met that evening, and he marveled at Elena's ability to predict their daughter's character with such accuracy. It spoke to the depth of Elena's attention as a mother, her careful observation of Sophia's developing personality, and her determination to document everything for the father who might someday want to know. Marcus found himself studying his reflection in the dark window, searching for traces of Sophia in his own features. Her eyes were definitely Eleanor's, but her stubborn chin might be his. Her careful way of choosing words reminded him of his own tendency to think before speaking, while her artistic sensibility was pure Elena. His phone buzzed with messages from his assistant, reminders about upcoming meetings and conference calls that had seemed vitally important just hours ago. Now they felt like obligations from another. Life, tasks belonging to a version of himself that no longer quite fit. How could he sit through presentations about quarterly projections when his daughter was sleeping in a dormitory room at the same orphanage where he'd once counted ceiling tiles and wondered if anyone would ever choose him? Marcus called his assistant and cancelled his morning meetings, then his afternoon ones as well, For the first time in his career, he cleared his entire schedule without rescheduling, simply making space for something more important than work. His staff would be confused, his business partners might be concerned, but Marcus found he cared less about their reactions than he would have imagined possible. Sleep proved elusive that night. Marcus lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling of his master bedroom, thinking about Sophia sleeping in whatever small space she'd been assigned at Sunshine. Did she have nightmares about losing her mother? Did she ever feel scared in the dark? Had she inherited his childhood insomnia, the restless mind that had driven him to read under flashlight beams long after lights out? By dawn, Marcus had made several decisions that would have seemed impossible 24 hours earlier. He would restructure his involvement with Chen Technologies, stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on what truly mattered. He would explore the process of adoption or custody, though he suspected the legal complexities would be significant. Most importantly, he would get to know his daughter as the unique person she was, not simply as a genetic connection to his past. Marcus arrived at Sunshine Children's Home early the next morning, carrying coffee for the staff and a bag of art supplies he'd hastily purchased from an all-night convenience store. Mrs. Kellerman met him at the front door, her expression warm but slightly puzzled by his early arrival. "You're here bright and early," she observed, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The children are just finishing breakfast. Sophia has been asking about you since she woke up." The thought that Sophia had been thinking about him filled Marcus with a warmth he'd rarely experienced. "Is there somewhere we could talk privately first?" he asked Mrs. Kellerman. "I have some questions about the legal aspects of my situation." Mrs. Kellerman led him to her office, closing the door behind them before settling into her desk chair. Marcus took the seat across from her, feeling oddly like a student called to the principal's office, despite being one of the facility's most significant donors. "I assume Sophia shared some important information with you yesterday," Mrs. Kellerman said carefully. "She did," Marcus confirmed. "Elena's letter explained quite a lot about my connection to Sophia. I'm still processing everything, but I want to understand what options I might have regarding her future." Mrs. Kellerman nodded thoughtfully. "Sophia's legal status is somewhat complicated," she began. "Elena never identified a father on Sophia's birth certificate, so there's no legal recognition of your parental rights. However, if you're willing to undergo DNA testing and navigate the appropriate legal channels, it would certainly be possible to establish paternity and explore custody arrangements." Marcus felt a mixture of hope and anxiety at her words. "What would that process involve?" he asked. "It would require court proceedings, background checks, home studies, and extensive documentation," Mrs. Kellerman explained. "The state's primary concern is always the best interest of the child. Your financial resources would certainly ensure Sophia's material needs are met, but the courts would also evaluate your emotional readiness for parenthood and your ability to provide stability." Marcus considered this information carefully. "How long might such a process take?" he asked. "Several months at minimum," Mrs. Kellerman replied, "possibly longer, depending on various factors. In the meantime, we could arrange for regular visitation and gradually increase your involvement in Sophia's daily life, assuming that's what you both want." "It is," Marcus said without hesitation. "I want to be part of her life, in whatever way is possible." Mrs. Kellerman smiled, her expression softening. "I'm glad to hear that. Sophia is a remarkable child who deserves every opportunity for happiness. But I need to ask you something difficult, Mr. Chen. Are you prepared for the realities of parenting? It's not just about providing financial support or occasional visits. Children need consistency, patience, and emotional availability. They need someone who will be there for scraped knees and homework struggles and teenage rebellion." Marcus felt the weight of her question. "I don't know if I'm prepared," he admitted honestly, "but I know I want to learn. I've spent my entire adult life building things, solving problems, adapting to challenges. This feels like the most important challenge I've ever faced." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Mrs. Kellerman called for the visitor to enter, and Sophia appeared in the doorway, dressed in clean clothes, but with paint already under her fingernails. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," she said politely, though her eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement. "Are you ready to see my artwork now?" Marcus stood, his heart lifting at the sight of her eager face. "I've been looking forward to it," he said honestly. Sophia led him through the corridors toward the art room, chattering about the project she'd been working on and the techniques their volunteer instructor had taught her. Marcus found himself relaxing as he listened to her enthusiasm, struck by how easy it felt to talk with her despite the monumental nature of their relationship. The art room was empty except for Sophia's latest painting, which sat on an easel near the window where the morning light could illuminate it properly. Marcus approached the canvas and felt his breath catch at what he saw. Sophia had painted a family portrait of sorts, but not in the traditional sense. Instead, she'd created a dreamlike scene showing a man and woman sitting beneath an oak tree, both young and smiling, while a small girl played nearby among fallen leaves. The style was impressionistic, showing remarkable talent for someone her age, but it was the emotional content that moved Marcus most. "This is beautiful, Sophia," he said softly. "Tell me about it." Sophia moved to stand beside him, studying her own work with the critical eye of a serious artist. "It's you and Mom when you were young," she explained matter-of-factly. "She told me about the oak tree where you used to talk about your dreams. I added myself because I wanted to be part of that happiness too." The simple explanation hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child had painted herself into the happiness her parents had shared before she was born, creating a family scene that had never actually existed, but somehow felt more real than any photograph. "You made us look so happy," Marcus observed, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom always looked happy when she talked about you," Sophia said simply. "Even when she was sad about other things, talking about your time together always made her smile. She said those were some of the best days of her life." Marcus studied the painting more closely, noting the careful attention Sophia had paid to details she could only have learned from Elena's stories. The way she'd painted the younger version of Marcus showed someone confident but kind, while her depiction of Elena captured a joy and vitality that must have reflected Elena's memories of their relationship. "What made you decide to paint this particular scene?" Marcus asked. Sophia considered the question seriously. "I wanted to understand where I came from," she said, "not just genetically, but emotionally. Mom always said that love leaves traces even when people can't be together anymore. I wanted to paint those traces." The sophistication of her thinking amazed Marcus. Here was a child who had lost her mother, who was living in an institution, who had every reason to feel bitter about her circumstances, yet she was focused on finding beauty and meaning in her family's complicated history. They spent the next hour in the art room, Sophia showing Marcus her other paintings and drawings, while he marveled at her talent and insight. Her artwork revealed a child who saw the world with unusual depth, who found subjects for her art in everything from the way sunlight fell across the playground to the expressions on other children's faces during story time. "Would you like to see where I sleep?" Sophia asked as they finished looking at her portfolio. "Very much," Marcus replied, though he felt nervous about seeing the reality of her living conditions. Sophia led him up a staircase Marcus remembered climbing countless times during his own years at Sunshine. The dormitory area had been renovated since his time there, but it still carried the institutional feeling of a place designed to house many children with limited resources. Sophia's bed was one of 4, in a room she shared with 3 other girls. The space was clean and well-maintained, but Marcus was struck by how little personal space each child had. Sophia's area was marked by a small shelf holding a few books, some art supplies, and a framed photograph of Elena. "This is where Mom and I lived before she got sick," Sophia explained, pointing to the photograph. "We had our own apartment for a while, but when she couldn't work anymore, we had to move back here." Marcus picked up the photograph, studying Elena's face with the knowledge that she'd been raising their daughter alone while battling illness. She looked tired in the picture, but was smiling, her arm around Sophia, who appeared to be about 6 years old. "She was beautiful," Marcus said softly, meaning both Elena and the life she'd built with their daughter. "She was the best mom ever," Sophia said simply. "She read to me every night, even when she was really tired. She helped me with my homework and taught me how to paint and told me stories about everything." Marcus set the photograph back on the shelf. "Oh, carefully. What kinds of stories did she tell you about me?" he asked. Sophia sat on her narrow bed, patting the space beside her in invitation. Marcus sat down, noting how the mattress dipped under their combined weight, clearly well used by previous residents. "She told me you were the smartest person she ever met," Sophia began. "She said you could solve any problem if you thought about it long enough. She said you were kind to kids who were smaller than you, and that you always shared your dessert with anyone who didn't get one." Marcus felt a rush of warmth at these details, remembering how Elena had noticed his small acts of kindness during their time together. He'd forgotten about sharing desserts, about helping younger children with their homework, about the ways he'd tried to make life at Sunshine a little easier for everyone. "She also said you had big dreams, but that you never forgot where you came from," Sophia continued. "She said you wanted to help people like us, people who didn't have regular families, because you understood what it felt like to need help." The accuracy of Elena's predictions about his future philanthropic work was startling. She'd seen something in the teenage Marcus that he'd almost lost sight of himself, a core motivation that had been buried under years of corporate success and personal achievement. "What else did she tell you?" Marcus asked, hungry for these glimpses into how Elena had remembered their relationship. "She said you made her feel like she could do anything," Sophia said. "Before she met you, she thought she wasn't smart enough for college or important enough to be a writer. But you believed in her so much that she started believing in herself too." Marcus felt tears threatening as he realized how their young love had shaped both their lives in ways he'd never fully understood. Eleanor had given him the first experience of unconditional acceptance, while he'd apparently given her the confidence to pursue her dreams. "Did she ever seem angry about my not being here?" Marcus asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know. Sophia shook her head decisively. "Never angry," she said. "Sometimes sad, especially when she was really sick and worried about what would happen to me, but never angry. She always said you didn't know about me, and that it wasn't fair to be mad at someone for something they didn't know about." The generosity of Eleanor's perspective made Marcus's chest ache with loss and regret. Even facing her own mortality, even struggling to secure their daughter's future, Elena had protected his memory and refused to let Sophia develop resentment toward the father who'd been absent through no fault of his own. They were interrupted by the sound of other children returning from their morning activities. Sophia's roommates burst through the door with the energy typical of young girls, stopping short when they saw Marcus sitting on Sophia's bed. "Sophia, is this your visitor?" asked a girl with curly red hair who appeared to be about 10 years old. "This is Mr. Chen," Sophia said with obvious pride. "He knew my mom when they were young." The girls regarded Marcus with the frank curiosity of children unimpressed by adult status or wealth. They peppered him with questions about whether he liked living at Sunshine, what his favorite subject had been in school, and whether he thought their current art teacher was as good as the previous. 1. Marcus found himself relaxing under their innocent interrogation, remembering what it felt like to be part of a community where everyone shared similar circumstances. These children didn't care about his net worth or his business achievements. They were simply curious about his connection to their world. As the morning progressed, Marcus joined Sophia and her friends for lunch in the dining hall, sitting at one of the round tables and listening to animated discussions about schoolwork, playground politics, and weekend activities. The staff treated him with polite respect, but didn't fuss over his presence, clearly committed to maintaining normal routines for the children. After lunch, Sophia asked if he'd like to see the library where they'd met the previous evening. Marcus agreed, and they settled into the same chairs they'd occupied during their first real conversation. This time, Sophia brought along a notebook filled with questions she'd apparently been saving for their next meeting. "I've been thinking about what it means that you're my father," she began with characteristic directness. "Do you want to know what I've been wondering about?" "Please tell me," Marcus said, bracing himself for difficult questions about his absence from her life. "I want to know what your favorite color is," Sophia said, consulting her notebook seriously. "And whether you like chocolate or vanilla ice cream better. And if you ever get scared during thunderstorms like I do." The simplicity of her questions caught Marcus off guard. He'd been prepared for anger or resentment, for complex discussions about abandonment and responsibility. Instead, Sophia wanted to know the basic details that would help her understand him as a person, rather than as an abstract concept of fatherhood. "My favorite color is blue," Marcus said, settling into the conversation. "Dark blue, like the sky just before it gets completely dark. I prefer chocolate ice cream, and I used to be afraid of thunderstorms when I was your age, but I'm not anymore." Sophia made careful notes in her notebook, as if she were conducting a scientific study. "What changed about the thunderstorms?" she asked. Marcus thought about the question seriously. "I learned that scary things seem less frightening when you understand them better," he explained. "Thunderstorms are just weather, just nature doing what it's supposed to do. Once I understood the science behind them, they became interesting instead of scary." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "Mom used to say that fear usually meant we didn't understand something yet. She said the best way to stop being afraid was to learn more about whatever was scaring us." The wisdom of Elena's parenting philosophy impressed Marcus once again. She'd clearly spent considerable time helping Sophia develop emotional intelligence and coping strategies that would serve her well throughout her life. "Can I ask you some questions now?" Marcus said. Sophia nodded eagerly, closing her notebook and giving him her full attention. "What's your favorite subject in school?" Marcus began. "Art and reading," Sophia replied immediately. "I like art because I can make whatever I'm feeling into something other people can see. I like reading because books let me visit places I've never been and meet people I'd never get to know otherwise." Marcus smiled, recognizing Elena's influence in Sophia's love of literature and his own analytical nature in her thoughtful approach to artistic expression. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" he asked. Sophia considered this question carefully. "I want to help kids like us," she said finally. "Maybe as a teacher or a counselor, or maybe by writing books that help people understand what it's like to live in places like this. I want to make sure no kid ever feels invisible or unimportant." The maturity of her goals amazed Marcus. At 8 years old, Sophia had already developed a sense of purpose that was focused on service to others, a perspective that had taken Marcus decades to fully embrace. They spent the remainder of the afternoon talking, sharing stories, and learning about each other with the careful attention of people building a relationship from scratch. Marcus told Sophia about his work, explaining it in terms she could understand, while she shared her thoughts about everything from her favorite books to her concerns about some of the younger children at Sunshine. As evening approached, Marcus realized he was reluctant to leave. The simple pleasure of talking with Sophia, of seeing the world through her eyes, had been more fulfilling than any business meeting or corporate achievement he could remember. She possessed a combination of Elena's emotional intelligence and what he was beginning to recognize as his own determination, creating a personality that was both familiar and uniquely her own. When Mrs. Kellerman appeared to remind Sophia about dinner preparations, Marcus felt genuinely disappointed that their time together was ending. He'd discovered that spending time with his daughter wasn't just an obligation or responsibility. It was actually the highlight of his day. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Sophia asked as they walked toward the dining hall together. "If you'd like me to," Marcus replied. "I could come every day for a while, if that would be okay with everyone." Sophia stopped walking and looked up at him with an expression of pure joy. "Every day would be perfect," she said. "There's so much more I want to show you and ask you about." As Marcus prepared to leave Sunshine that evening, he realized that his perspective on time had fundamentally shifted. For years, he'd measured days by productivity, by deals closed and problems solved. Now he found himself thinking about tomorrow in terms of conversations with Sophia, of learning more about her interests and sharing more about himself. The drive back to his penthouse felt different than it had the night before. Instead of feeling isolated and disconnected, Marcus felt purposeful in a way he'd never experienced. He had something to look forward to that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share, something that mattered in ways he was only beginning to understand. That night, Marcus called his lawyer and began the process of establishing legal, paternity, and exploring custody options. He also contacted a real estate agent about finding an apartment that would be suitable for a child, something with more warmth and character than his current sterile space. As he fell asleep, Marcus found himself thinking about Sophia's painting of the family that might have been, and wondering if it might still be possible to create the happiness she'd captured on canvas. For the first time in years, the future felt full of possibilities that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with love. 3 weeks into their daily visits, Marcus arrived at Sunshine Children's Home to find Sophia waiting for him in the lobby, her small backpack slung over her shoulder and an expression of barely contained excitement lighting up her face. Mrs. Kellerman stood beside her, holding a manila folder that Marcus had come to associate with important conversations about Sophia's future. "Mr. Chen," Mrs. Kellerman said warmly, "Sophia has been counting down the minutes until your arrival. She has something very special planned for today." Sophia bounced slightly on her toes, her usual composed demeanor replaced by the enthusiasm of a child with a wonderful secret. "Can we go somewhere different today?" she asked. "Somewhere that's important to both of us?" Marcus felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with slight apprehension. "Where did you have in mind?" he asked gently. Sophia reached into her backpack and withdrew a folded piece of paper, handling it with the same care she'd shown Elena's letter. "It's an address," she explained. "Mom wrote it down for me before she died. She said, if I ever got to know you, I should take you there because it would help you remember something important." Mrs. Kellerman cleared her throat softly. "I've spoken with our transportation coordinator," she said. "If you're comfortable with it, Sophia has permission for an off-campus visit today. The address is about 20 minutes from here." Marcus took the paper from Sophia's small hands, unfolding it to reveal an address written in Elena's familiar handwriting. The street name seemed vaguely familiar, stirring memories he couldn't quite place, but the numbers meant nothing to him. "Do you know what's at this address?" he asked Sophia. Sophia shook her head, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Mom never told me. She just said it was a place where you and she were very happy together, and that seeing it might help you understand something you'd forgotten about yourself." The mystery both intrigued and unsettled Marcus. Elena had clearly planned this moment carefully, leaving behind instructions that would guide their daughter in connecting with him on a deeper level. The trust it represented, the faith Elena had maintained in his essential character despite the years that had passed, felt both humbling and overwhelming. "All right," Marcus said, making his decision. "Let's go see what your mother wanted us to find." The drive through Chicago's neighborhoods felt different with Sophia beside him in the car, her small face pressed to the window as she pointed out landmarks and asked questions about the city. Marcus found himself seeing familiar streets through her eyes, noticing details he'd overlooked during countless commutes focused on business calls and market reports. As they traveled, Sophia chatted about her week at Sunshine, telling him about a new friend who'd arrived from foster care, a science project she was working on, and a story she'd started writing about a girl who could paint doorways to anywhere. She wanted to go. Her imagination and resilience continued to amaze Marcus, the way she found wonder and possibility even in circumstances that could have left her bitter or defeated. The address led them to a quiet residential street, lined with modest but well-maintained houses, each with small front yards and mature trees that suggested an established neighborhood. Marcus parked in front of a two-story home with blue shutters and a wraparound porch, studying the building for any spark of recognition. Do you remember this place?" Sophia asked, watching his face carefully. Marcus shook his head slowly, but something about the house felt significant in a way he couldn't explain. The architecture was familiar. The way the afternoon light fell across the porch steps seemed important, but the specific memory remained elusive. They walked up the front path together, Sophia's hand slipping naturally into his as they approached the front door. Before Marcus could decide whether to knock, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 70s with silver hair and kind eyes that lit up with recognition when she saw Sophia. "Sophia Martinez," the woman exclaimed, opening her arms wide. "I was hoping Elena's instructions would bring you here someday." Sophia ran forward into the woman's embrace with obvious familiarity, leaving Marcus standing on the porch feeling confused and slightly left out of whatever reunion was taking place. "Mrs. Patterson," Sophia said, pulling back from the hug with a huge smile. "This is Marcus Chen, my father, the one Mom told you about." Mrs. Patterson turned her attention to Marcus, her expression shifting to one of gentle understanding, mixed with something that looked like long-held affection. "Marcus Chen," she said softly. "My goodness, you've grown up exactly the way Elena said you would. Successful and handsome, but with the same kind eyes you had as a boy." Marcus felt even more confused. "I'm sorry," he said politely, "but I don't think we've met before. How do you know Elena? How do you know Sophia?" Mrs. Patterson smiled, stepping back to invite them both inside. "Come in, dear ones. There's quite a story to tell, and Elena made me promise to share it with you when the time was right." The interior of the house was warm and comfortable, filled with family photographs, well-loved furniture, and the particular coziness that came from decades of happy memories. Mrs. Patterson led them to a living room where afternoon sunlight streamed through lace curtains, creating patterns on a coffee table that held several photo albums and what appeared to be a stack of letters tied with ribbon. "Please sit down," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into a recliner that was clearly her favorite spot. "Marcus and Sophia, there are things about Elena's life after she left Sunshine that you need to know, especially you, Marcus." Marcus sat on the couch beside Sophia, his mind racing with possibilities. Sophia seemed completely comfortable, clearly familiar with both Mrs. Patterson and her surroundings, which only added to Marcus's confusion. Mrs. Patterson picked up one of the photo albums and opened it to the first page. "Elena came to live with me when she aged out of Sunshine," she began. "I'd been a volunteer at the children's home for years, And when Elena needed a place to stay while she got on her feet, I offered her my spare room. She turned the album toward them, revealing photographs of a young Elena that made Marcus's heart skip. There she was at 18, sitting in this same living room looking nervous but hopeful. Another photo showed her at a small graduation ceremony, receiving her high school diploma, with Mrs. Patterson beaming beside her. Elena lived here for almost 3 years, Mrs. Patterson continued, turning pages that documented Elena's transition to independent adulthood. She worked part-time while taking community college classes, determined to make something of herself despite having no family support. Marcus studied the photos, seeing glimpses of the Elena he'd known mixed with evidence of the woman she'd become. She looked happy in most of the pictures, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he recognized as the particular loneliness of someone who'd lost touch with the person who mattered most to her. "She talked about you constantly," Mrs. Patterson said gently, meeting Marcus's eyes. "Every day, especially in the beginning. She'd heard through mutual friends at Sunshine that you'd received a full scholarship to Northwestern, and she was so proud of you, she could barely contain herself." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "She knew about Northwestern?" he asked. "Of course she knew," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Elena made it her business to follow your achievements. She clipped every newspaper article about your academic successes, saved every mention of your early business ventures. She had a scrapbook dedicated entirely to your accomplishments." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. While he'd been building his career and trying to forget his past, Elena had been carefully documenting his progress, maintaining a connection he'd never known existed. The loyalty and love it represented felt overwhelming. But why didn't she ever contact me? Marcus asked, his voice thick with emotion. Mrs. Patterson exchanged a meaningful look with Sophia before continuing. "Because she discovered she was pregnant just weeks after you left for college, and she was terrified of derailing your future. Elena was convinced that you were destined for greatness, and she couldn't bear the thought of being the reason you had to compromise your dreams." Marcus felt tears threatening as the full scope of Eleanor's sacrifice became clear. She'd protected his ambitions at the cost of her own happiness and their daughter's right to know her father. Sophia reached over and took his hand, her small fingers warm and reassuring. "She did it because she loved you," Sophia said quietly. "Sometimes people make hard choices because they love someone so much they put that person's happiness first." Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly at Sophia's insight. "Eleanor was remarkable that way," she agreed, "even when she was struggling financially, even when she was scared about raising a baby alone. Her biggest concern was always your well-being, Marcus." She turned several more pages in the photo album, revealing pictures of Elena during her pregnancy, glowing with happiness despite the circumstances. "Here she is at the community college graduation, Mrs. Patterson said, pointing to a photo of Elena in cap and gown, her pregnancy just beginning to show. She insisted on finishing her degree before Sophia was born. Marcus studied the image of pregnant Elena, trying to reconcile the woman in the photograph with his memories of the girl he'd known. She looked older, more mature, but still recognizably the person he'd fallen in love with at Sunshine. "Elena lived here through Sophia's first year," Mrs. Patterson continued, showing photos of Elena with baby Sophia that made Marcus's heart ache with loss and regret. She was such a devoted mother, working multiple jobs to support them both while taking online classes to complete her bachelor's degree. The photographs told a story of determination and love that Marcus found both inspiring and heartbreaking. Elena holding newborn Sophia in this same living room. Elena reading to toddler Sophia on the front porch. Elena helping Sophia take her first steps in the backyard garden. When Sophia was 2, Elena finally felt stable enough to move into their own apartment, Mrs. Patterson explained. But she never stopped visiting, never stopped considering this place a second home for both of them. Marcus looked around the room with new understanding, recognizing it now as a place where his daughter had spent countless hours, where Elena had found the family support she'd never had as a child. Sophia has continued visiting me every few weeks since Elena's death, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice gentle but emotional. She helps me tend the garden, and we look through old photographs, and she tells me about her life at Sunshine. She's been anxiously waiting for the day when she could. Bring you here. Marcus turned to Sophia, amazed once again by the depth of preparation Elena had invested in their daughter's understanding of her family history. How long have you known about Mrs. Patterson? He asked. Sophia smiled, settling back against the couch cushions. Mom brought me here all the time when I was little, she said. Mrs. Patterson taught me how to bake cookies and helped me learn to read before I started school. When Mom got sick, Mrs. Patterson wanted to take care of me, but the state said she was too old to become my legal guardian. Mrs. Patterson's expression grew sad. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever experienced, she said. Losing Elena and then having to watch Sophia go into the system despite having someone who loved her and wanted to care for her. Marcus felt anger building at the bureaucratic obstacles that had separated Sophia from someone who clearly cared deeply about her welfare. But before he could express his frustration, Mrs. Patterson continued. That's why Eleanor wrote the letter she left for you, she said. She knew that if anything happened to her, Sophia would need someone with the resources and determination to navigate the legal system effectively. She believed that once you knew about Sophia, you'd move heaven and earth to make sure she was safe and loved. The faith Elena had maintained in his character, despite the years that had passed and the success that might have changed him, felt both humbling and empowering. She'd seen something in the 18-year-old boy he'd been and trusted that it would still exist in the man he'd become. Mrs. Patterson reached for the stack of letters tied with ribbon. Elena wrote to you regularly over the years, she said softly. Letters she never sent, but words she needed to express. She asked me to give these to Sophia if anything ever happened to her, with instructions to share them with you when the time was right. She handed the bundle to Marcus, who accepted it with trembling hands. The letters spanned years, judging by the different types of paper and varying ink colors, representing an ongoing conversation Eleanor had maintained with the father of her child, despite his absence from their lives. Marcus untied the ribbon carefully, his heart racing as he unfolded the first letter. It was dated just months after Sophia's birth, written in Elena's careful handwriting that had evolved from the girl's script he remembered to a woman's more confident penmanship. My dearest Marcus, the letter began. Sophia is 3 months old today, and she smiled for the first time this morning. I wish you could have seen it. She has your stubborn chin and my eyes. But when she smiles, she looks like neither of us, and both of us at the same time. Marcus felt tears spilling over as he read Eleanor's description of their daughter's early milestones, the small moments of joy and wonder that he'd missed entirely. She documented Sophia's first tooth, her first word, her first steps, creating a record of their daughter's development that she'd somehow known Marcus would eventually want to read. He read several more letters, each one revealing Elena's deep love for their daughter and her continued affection for Marcus despite their separation. She wrote about Sophia's personality as it emerged, her artistic talents, her curiosity about the world, her questions about her father. In a letter dated when Sophia was 5, Elena had written, "She asks about you constantly now. I've shown her the newspaper clippings about your business success, and she's so proud to know her father is changing the world the way you always said you would. But mostly she wants to know if you would have liked her, if you would have been proud of her artwork and her reading skills and her kind heart." Marcus looked up from the letters to find Sophia watching him with patient understanding. She asks if I would have been proud of her, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Sophia nodded. Mom always said you would be, but that I'd have to meet you myself to know for sure. Marcus set the letters aside and turned to face Sophia fully. I am proud of you, he said with absolute conviction. I'm proud of your talent and your intelligence and your incredible heart. I'm proud that you're brave enough to reach out to a father you'd never met, and generous enough to forgive me for not being there when you needed me. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. I know, she said simply. I could tell from the first day we met. Mom was right about you. Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her own eyes with a tissue, clearly moved by the reunion she'd helped facilitate. Elena would be so happy to see this moment, she said softly. She never stopped believing that someday you two would find each other. Marcus spent the next hour reading through Elena's letters, while Sophia and Mrs. Patterson caught up on recent events. The letters painted a picture of a woman who'd built a meaningful life despite difficult circumstances, who'd raised their daughter with love and wisdom, who'd never stopped caring about the boy she'd known, even as he became a man she'd never gotten to meet again. In the final letter, dated just months before Eleanor's death, she'd written words that Marcus knew would stay with him forever. I don't know if Sophia will ever find you, or if you'll want to be part of her life if she does. But I need you to know that loving you changed me in the best possible ways, and raising our daughter has been the greatest privilege of my life. She carries the best parts of both of us, and whatever happens, that will be my lasting gift to the world. As the afternoon drew to a close, Mrs. Patterson walked them through the house, showing Marcus the room where Elena had lived, the garden where she'd taught Sophia to plant vegetables, the back porch where they'd spent countless evenings reading. Together, each space held memories that helped Marcus understand the life Elena had built and the foundation of love and stability she'd provided for their daughter. Before they left, Mrs. Patterson pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. Sophia is an extraordinary child, she said quietly. Elena raised her with such wisdom and love, but she's also inherited your drive and determination. She's going to do remarkable things with her life, but she needs guidance and support that goes beyond what any institution can provide. Marcus nodded, understanding the unspoken message. I'm working with lawyers to establish legal custody, he said. It's complicated because there's no documentation of my paternity, but I'm determined to make it happen. Mrs. Patterson smiled. Elena always said you were someone who didn't give up when something mattered to you. Sophia needs that kind of advocate in her life. As they drove back to Sunshine Children's Home, Sophia was unusually quiet, processing the emotional weight of the afternoon. Finally, she spoke up from the passenger seat. Are you glad Mom saved all those letters? She asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. I'm glad she wrote them, he said. They helped me understand how much she loved you and how much thought she put into every decision she made about your life, but I'm sad that she felt she had to carry all of that alone. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. She wasn't really alone, though, she said. She had Mrs. Patterson and the people at the community college, and her friends from work. And she always said she had you in her heart, even when you weren't physically there. The maturity of Sophia's perspective continued to amaze Marcus. At 8 years old, she possessed an emotional intelligence that allowed her to see their complicated family history with both clarity and compassion. What happens now? Sophia asked as they pulled into the parking lot at Sunshine. Marcus turned off the engine and faced his daughter, this remarkable child who had patiently waited for him to find his way back to what truly mattered. Now we build the family your mother always wanted us to have, he said. It might take some time to work out all the legal details, but I promise you this, Sophia, we're going to be together. Really together, as a family. Sophia's smile could have powered the entire city, "Mom always said that good things were worth waiting for," she said. "I think she was right about that too." That evening, Marcus made several phone calls that would reshape his entire life. He accelerated the legal proceedings for establishing paternity and custody, hired additional lawyers to expedite the process, and began making arrangements to restructure his business obligations so he could prioritize his relationship with Sophia. He also called Mrs. Patterson to discuss the possibility of Sophia spending weekends at his apartment once the legal issues were resolved, maintaining her connection to the woman who had been such an important part of her life. Most importantly, Marcus began planning for a future that centered around being the father Sophia deserved, someone who would be present for homework struggles and art projects, for everyday conversations and important milestones. He understood, now that Elena's greatest gift hadn't been protecting his ambitions by raising their daughter alone. It had been preparing Sophia to recognize love and choose family when the opportunity finally presented itself. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same courtroom where he'd once defended corporate mergers and acquisition deals, but this time the stakes were infinitely more personal. The judge reviewed the DNA test results that confirmed his paternity, the character references from colleagues and friends, and the extensive documentation of his financial stability and emotional readiness for parenthood. Sophia sat beside him, in her best dress, holding Mrs. Patterson's hand on one side and his on the other, surrounded by the makeshift family that had formed around their reunion. Mrs. Kellerman from Sunshine had come to testify about Sophia's well-being and Marcus's commitment to her care. His assistant had rearranged his entire schedule so he could be present for every hearing, every meeting, every step of the process. When the judge granted Marcus full legal custody, Sophia threw her arms around him with a joy that made every struggle worthwhile. In that moment, Marcus understood that all his previous achievements had been preparation for this one victory, this chance to be the father Elena had always believed he could become. The celebration that followed was small but perfect, held in Mrs. Patterson's backyard garden, where Sophia had learned to grow vegetables, and Elena had dreamed of the day when her daughter would finally meet her father. Marcus looked around at the faces of people who had become his chosen family. Mrs. Patterson, who had provided stability and love. Mrs. Kellerman, who had facilitated their reunion. Sophia, who had patiently waited for him to remember what truly mattered. As the sun set over Chicago, Sophia approached Marcus with a wrapped package she'd been hiding behind Mrs. Patterson's rose bushes. "It's a Father's Day present," she said with a mischievous grin. "I know it's not Father's Day, but I figured we could make our own special day for it." Marcus unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a framed painting that took his breath away. Sophia had recreated the family portrait she'd shown him months earlier, but this version was different. Instead of painting herself into a scene from the past, she'd created a new image that captured their present reality. Marcus and Sophia stood together in Mrs. Patterson's garden, surrounded by the people who had helped bring them together, all of them smiling with the particular joy that came from found family. At the bottom of the painting, in Sophia's careful handwriting, were the words Elena had written in her final letter. "Love leaves traces, even when people can't be together anymore." Marcus pulled Sophia into a hug that felt like coming home after a journey he hadn't realized he'd been taking his entire adult life. For the first time since leaving Sunshine Children's Home at 18, he understood that success wasn't measured by what you achieved, but by what you chose to love and protect and cherish. In finding his daughter, Marcus had rediscovered the boy Elena had fallen in love with, the person who understood that the most important things in life couldn't be bought or built or achieved through determination alone. They could only be nurtured through patience and presence and the daily choice to show up for the people who mattered most. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.